Good morning and welcome to the 127th episode of the Veritas Fact Finding Series. And this morning, I'm joined by my good friend, Melanie Paradis. Melanie, good morning.
Good morning.
We're back again live to go on the ground to speak to industry professionals in an unscripted, candid video format to discover how we can make better investment decisions. If you're watching and you like what you hear, give us a like and follow us at veritascorp.com. Quick disclaimer, this broadcast is not to be taken as investment advice, and participants or employees of the Veritas Group of companies may own securities discussed in this broadcast. And while we love all our guests, and Melanie in particular, this session may contain forward-looking statements, investment opinions, and comments that we may not agree with, although that might be very difficult in this situation. We had to rush this to get this on. I have to tell everybody, both to fit into Melanie's calendar and to fit into the presidential inauguration, the tariff, no tariff, the election, no election, the prorogue, all these new words that we learned about Canadian politics. Melanie's here to help us with that. I'm going to let her describe herself a little bit better, perhaps, than myself, but based on our original discussion together, she's very modest. I'm going to lay it out this way. She's worked with, has a long experience working with the Conservative Party in war rooms, as she calls it, during provincial campaigns and federal campaigns to work with sort of that experience, and then stayed on as director of communications with the leader of the opposition, with the political party, with the Conservative Party. She then, after working along with a number of corporate entities, she started out Texture Communications, which is the boutique communications firm powered by 6 seasoned women who have built the trust of media, government, and leaders across sectors. If this is the first time you're watching her, I'm going to give her a big plug. You can see her every week at CTV's PowerPlay's Front Bench panel, where she provides political commentary every Friday at 5:30 p.m. Eastern. I like to summarize it this way. If there's a holy fuck moment happening in corporate or government situations, they call Melanie and her firm to figure out how should we deal with this and make it smooth for the public. Melanie, why don't you just start out, as I always like to do with our guests, tell us about yourself, why it is that you want to get messed up and mixed up in these very complex situations, both from political and corporate standpoint.
Messed up is right, I think. That's the way to look at it, especially in politics. It can definitely get messy. And this is a really important moment for everyone to be watching politics, because things are happening a mile a minute. We saw so many executive orders come out last night from President Trump's office, and the implications of them are significant for investors, for Canadians, for Americans, certainly. There's a lot to unpack there. So I guess I'll start at the beginning. I worked in corporate communications and public relations for over 15 years. Politics was always a side hustle for me. It was something that I volunteered on campaigns, all sorts of conservative campaigns at both the provincial and federal level and across the country. I would do media training for a lot of our candidates across the country to get them ready for interviews and for debate prep as well. Worked in central war rooms, which basically means that at campaign headquarters, I was working there at sort of the heartbeat of the campaign, and helping candidates to communicate more effectively and, more importantly, avoid problems. There's always problems with candidates during a general election campaign, and I would help smooth those over. And when I worked for Erin O'Toole, who's a former leader of the official opposition, I was his director of communications. I was also the deputy campaign manager on his successful leadership bid. I then had a baby, and then he stopped being the leader within a few months of each other. Those things happened, and so while I was on maternity leave, I was struck with this challenge of no longer having a job, but then also the opportunity of getting to decide what I wanted to do next. Did I want to go back to working for one of the big firms that I was at, or did I want to start something for myself? And I founded Texture Communications because I think there's a real gap in our industry where executives, leaders across the country are not getting the white glove service that they deserve from communications advisors and political advisors. They're not being treated with that 24-hour, like 24/7 care and maintenance of when news breaks. You need your advisors beside you to help you navigate it, and that's what my firm does. We are all former political staff, and we know what it means to be on call and be ready to give you our unvarnished advice that you can trust.
Perfect. I like the word that you used, the word unvarnished and trust, because as I'm sure you know, veritas means truth. So that's all we're looking for here as we plow through the next sections of our discussion. First, we're going to start off talking about the Liberal leadership race. How's that going to happen? What are the particulars that lead to March 9th? Then we want to know what's going to happen after March 24th, because that's when apparently Parliament's going to resit. What does that mean? Then we'll talk about the economic and investment opportunities that result from both what we're seeing south of the 49th parallel and what will then become the new Canadian sort of federal political structure, if I can say that as the way to go. So let's start out with the Liberal leadership race. How does that work? Are we going to be able to do this in time?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So the election result is the election for the Liberal leadership is supposed to be on March 9th, which is an incredibly aggressive timeline. They gave themselves less than 2 months to get this done. The only time that we've seen a leadership move faster was when Doug Ford became the leader of the Ontario PC party. That was, I think, 48 days, which was also a crazy fast leadership. The way that this will be possible is, I think, and they haven't actually rolled out an explanation of how all of the voting is going to go, but I'm assuming it's going to be virtual voting. So you're going to vote online if you are a member of the Liberal Party, and it's a ranked ballot. So what that means is there will be, let's say there's 10 candidates that get into this race. There will probably be fewer than that because it's a short race and it's an expensive one. Costs $350,000 of money that you have to fundraise in order to just get into the race. But a ranked ballot means that you'll have the option to vote for everyone who's running, and you rank them in order. And when your first choice drops off, if they're no longer in contention, then your vote gets redistributed to your next pick. It's also weighted by riding, which means that it's not a one-for-one vote. So if a lot of the members are based in Toronto, if they all live in Rosedale, for example, their votes actually count for less if there's a lot of them in that one particular riding, because it's a points-based structure. So it's a complicated algorithm, but basically what it means is candidates need support from all across the country in order to be successful. They need a lot of support in Quebec, for example, in ridings everywhere that you can imagine. You want to be selling memberships in those areas and then getting those votes in. The purpose of this, and it's the same kind of system in the Conservative Party, by the way, but the reason why parties do this is you don't want a candidate who is just really big in one particular place, like who's really big in Vancouver but can't win in Montreal. You want to elect a leader who has mass appeal from coast to coast. So what I think will happen right now, we've got two really big names in the leadership race. We've got Mark Carney, former governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of in the UK as well, and you've got Chrystia Freeland, who's the former Minister of Finance and the former Deputy Prime Minister. They're the two frontrunners. If I had to pick one, Mark Carney's probably got an edge on Chrystia Freeland, in part because he's framing himself as an outsider, because he wasn't actually in the Trudeau government, although he was appointed as a financial advisor to the government. So he can't really say that he wasn't connected to it. But Chrystia Freeland is also a strong contender. And then you have some other people who are interesting, like Karina Gold, who is an MP. She was a minister. I think she's a House leader most recently. She may get, let's say that she gets something like 10% of the vote. I'm trying to demonstrate here how a lot of these candidates who have lower name recognition can still play an important role. In this leadership, if you don't win 50% on first ballot, like Pierre Poilievre did, for example. So Pierre Poilievre in the federal conservative leadership race, he won like 70% on first ballot. In that scenario, the other people who were voted in a ranked ballot don't matter. But I don't think it's going to go that way for the Liberals. I think it's going to be much closer between Mark Carney and Chrystia Freeland. So if neither of them have 50% on first ballot, then that's when they start working down the ranked ballot system. And a candidate like Karina Gold could become a kingmaker or queenmaker in that scenario, because where her votes go, where they get redistributed, really matters. So for those who are playing the home game, the only reason why this matters and for you to watch over the next couple of weeks is what you're going to be looking for is the way in which the candidates interact with each other and how they talk about each other is really important. Because if you are criticizing Karina Gold, for example, her supporters probably aren't going to vote for you as their number two, right? They're not going to put Mark Carney or put Chrystia Freeland down as their number two if that candidate's giving her a hard time. So it makes the dynamic very interesting, because I think you're going to see a lot of them sort of punching up instead at Mark Carney, and trying to distinguish themselves as opposed to fighting amongst each other, because you're going to need that down ballot support.
Just so I understand, let's say that you have a situation where it's 45-40 between Freeland, Carney, pick who comes where.
Yeah.
And then the next, the Gold, who you mentioned is next, she happens to have 15%. So do they take away her 15 and she decides where that 15% goes? Or who decides that 15%? Do they re-elect? Like, I think in the US you have they do another election, or they pick the leader. So go ahead.
Great question. So if you did this in person at a convention, and this is how a lot of parties used to do it, you'd literally see people walking across the floor with the flag, and they'd physically go and join another group. That's not what's going to happen here. Instead, it's individuals have marked their ballots separately. And so in some cases, people will have coordinated that, and a candidate will tell them, if you're voting for me number one, it's pretty clear I'm not going to win this. You should put this person as your number two. Or candidates who are vying for that second vote will say, I understand that you really want to vote for this candidate number one, but could I get your second ballot support? And that's when, but it's a person by person decision. So it's not being made by the candidate themselves. And so that's what will make direct marketing to those individuals, to those members, really important. You try to appeal, and I'll give you an example. So from the conservative leadership race in 2017, that's the one where Andrew Scheer just beat out Maxime Bernier by like a percentage.
Yes.
But he was just below Maxime Bernier up until the very end. There were like 17 candidates in that race. It was crazy. But it was Erin O'Toole, he finished third in that leadership. When his votes were redistributed, it was about 10% of the vote. Most of those voters went with Andrew Scheer, and that put him just over the top to beat out Maxime Bernier. And the same thing happened when Erin O'Toole beat Peter MacKay in 2020. He just edged out over Peter MacKay when Leslyn Lewis's ballots were redistributed. So that's likely what's going to happen here if Mark Carney doesn't win it right out of the gate.
Back to my example. So all that 15%, they would take away her number one vote, and then those specific ballots that already took place, they would see who was voted second on them, and then the computer would allocate those higher weight as number one vote to be for the whoever else remains. Cool. Yeah. Correct?
That's right.
Okay.
We don't make it easy, right? It's got to be complicated.
No, that's cool. And by the way, this is live. So we have a few dozen people on the session. If anyone has a question, just put it in the chat, and I will make sure that Melanie addresses it. All right, so let's move to. So now we're done. March 9th. Somebody gets chosen. What happens next between March 9th and March 24th?
Okay, great Great question. So someone becomes the leader, and then they get sworn in as prime minister. This is the kind of crazy part. Is
So
this
this year
person,
we will have three, could be two
yeah,
or three prime ministers.
yes. So and your account there is Justin Trudeau started the year off as a prime minister. Whoever gets elected, the Liberal leader will become the prime minister, even if it's just for a few weeks. And then if there's a general election in either the spring or the fall, probably Pierre Poilievre will be the third prime minister for
But
this particular year.
if let's say Carney wins, he doesn't have a seat in Ottawa. So
And he doesn't need one to be prime minister.
how can you go and be prime minister and actually have a say? Madam Speaker, they say you get up in the top benches. You're
Right.
in the back benches, sir. You can't say anything.
So you're right. The question period, there will be no prime minister in question period. So in that particular case, because he doesn't have the seat, there would be a leader in the House who would field questions. But our Constitution doesn't require that the prime minister be elected. And so he could be the prime minister. He just won't actually be in question period or in the House of Commons for anything.
But can he sit? Will an MP say, "Yeah, sure, Mark, you can have my seat"? No.
No, not without running. No,
Right.
he won't. Yeah, so that will certainly be a challenge. But look, there are Bonnie Crombie is an example right now. She's the leader of the Liberals in Ontario, and she doesn't have a seat. Jagmeet Singh didn't have a seat for a long time. He was the leader of the NDP without a seat. Obviously, when you're the prime minister, it's a bit different. You would like to see them in the House of Commons, certainly. But for the first few weeks, at least, that will be the situation that we're in, where we will have a prime minister, but who will not be in the House of Commons.
Okay. So now, comment that, and so Parliament sits on the 24th. What happens?
So the first thing, because we're prorogued right now, prorogation stops everything that's happening in terms of the legislative agenda. In order to come back from prorogation, you need a speech from the throne. So essentially what will happen is the new prime minister will tell the governor general what the new case for government is, like what their vision is, and this speech is delivered in the House of Commons. Actually, I think it's delivered in the Senate, but anyway, the speech is delivered in Parliament, and it's supposed to set the tone of what the next few, in this case probably weeks, but maybe months, of government will look like. What is your set of priorities for this government? And that's how you formally return to the everyday workings of Parliament. And then immediately following that, we need to pass, the government will need to pass a supply bill and a budget. Like these are different things, but understand, like, I know in the States, people talk about like the government being frozen and shutting down because they don't have funding. It's not quite as extreme here, but it's a similar scenario. The funding for this government runs out at the end of March. And so what they need to do is come back and pass a money bill and then a budget for the future year. If all of those votes, so the speech from the throne has a debate following it, so the opposition parties get to respond, and then there'll be a vote on it. It's a confidence vote. So is the supply bill and the budget. So there will be multiple opportunities for the government to be taken down within the span of about a week or two. You'll have a very volatile period at the end of March and early April where the opposition can vote non-confidence in the government, essentially, and then the government would dissolve and we would go to a general election. The alternative, however, is the new leader of the Liberal Party, the new prime minister, could negotiate another deal with the NDP or with the Bloc Québécois in order to maintain confidence of the government, confidence in the House, and that would allow them to pass their budget and to keep operating the government at least until the fixed election date in October.
And the election date in October is fait accompli. That happens no matter what.
So no, because so I know when we say we have fixed election dates, we think,
You're
oh, you have
killing me,
election.
I
know.
wore my compass cufflinks today. I thought you'd help us find a way.
I know.
And
So the Constitution of Canada actually only requires that we have a general federal election every 5 years. So technically speaking, we don't need to go on the fixed election date. Probably we will, though, because the optics of not going to an election then would be horrendous. But
in the
in
worst case, it
theory,
could go to 2026. Is that what you're saying?
yes. In the worst case, they could go to 2026.
And push till October again.
Yeah, but at that point, but again, this is a minority government, so they would
Sure.
have to keep holding on to a tenuous deal of some sort, a confidence in supply agreement, or an outright coalition government with the NDP or the Bloc.
All right, I guess everybody finds that clear because we didn't have any more questions. So good. So then there's all these negotiations. We're there. So now maybe we'll talk about, let's bring what's happened south of the border into all of this, almost like that's a shitstorm. So now all of this is happening here. In the meantime, just south of the 49th parallel, we have a shitstorm going on. What happens now?
So there was speculation that that the president was going to introduce by executive order tariffs yesterday, and he didn't. However, late last night, he did say that he was thinking February 1st for a 25% tariff on Canada and the United States, that he would implement it then. And then I think until then, they're just ordering studies on these tariffs. I think the good news is that buys us a little bit of time to continue the sort of PR efforts that we've seen some of the premiers of various Canadian provinces. They've been going to the United States, they've been going on Fox News. They're trying to deliver the message directly to Americans and to elected officials that this would be really damaging for the American people as well. The cost of living crisis that we have in Canada is also happening in the US, and tariffs just make things more expensive for everyone. And it won't help. It won't help them. So that's the argument that they're trying to make. And I think the hope is between now and February 1st that which is really just a few days away, that we could continue to appeal to Americans and try to sway this conversation to prevent the tariffs from happening altogether. But barring that, we're in a really vulnerable position, frankly, because the Americans are going to continue to say, like, we're effectively leaderless, right? Like, we have a lame duck prime minister right now. The Liberals are in the process of electing a new one, but the Americans could easily say, like, 100,000 Canadians are going to vote this guy, whoever the new prime minister is, in through the Liberal membership, right? That's not a mandate from the people. We're not negotiating with you until you've had a general election. They could say that. Send us someone who has a real mandate. I think that that's one of the compelling cases for the premiers to keep going and telling the Americans, like, look, no matter what's going on in Ottawa, you have to deal with us. You have to deal with Premier Daniel Smith on oil. You have to deal with Premier Doug Ford on manufacturing and the automotive sector. They're going to continue to be the people you have to deal with no matter what happens in Ottawa. So I hope, so they're going to keep going and keep trying to have those conversations, but it does nationally put us in a very vulnerable position right now.
But does that really happen? I mean, Doug Ford can talk about, make Canada great again, and wear his blue caps, and Danielle can go and take that other guy with him who drives me crazy, and pretend like they're the leader. But at the end of the day, the Alberta oil, and correct me if I'm wrong, and as well all the economic power the manufacturing that takes place in Ontario, which are both most vulnerable. Okay, yeah. It's not up to the premiers that decide this. It's a federal decision what happens with our oil. It's a federal decision what happens with our manufacturing. Now, correct me when I'm wrong.
I mean, yes and no. It is, like, I think that there are. And this is one of the things that Alberta's been talking about for years, and this notion of sovereignty and the provincial authority over natural resources, right?
Yeah.
Because natural resources are under provincial jurisdiction for the most part. Um, Trade, however, is not. But I think that we could get into some really interesting conversations about what exactly, you know, the goal of the federation was, and um, you know, who is actually in charge. Ultimately, I I I think that the honest answer is they aren't too sure, and they'd rather not find out.
You see, we can say a lot of things about Donald, but he's not stupid. What he's done is he's hit there's a number, you know, if you're going to beat your opponent, everybody has a funny bone, right? That they're like,
Yeah.
you study the opponent. If we're going in a boxing match, I know, okay, this guy, he's a sucker for the low left to the body, so I got to fake him so I can get that open, and then he's done. So what happens here is he's made he's incited this uh, dynamic where there's
Yeah.
the instability between Quebec, because he's commented about that, instability with Alberta and the rest of the provinces, and that they don't really support what's happening in Ottawa, because Alberta's been complaining for a long time about the way they've been treated. And you know, I'm going to try. I'm as impartial as possible here. I'm just trying to identify facts.
Western alienation is a real thing, and you're right to
Right.
point that out.
And so he's basically inciting this. And so we're going to
Yes.
have a hard time, you know, even when the new prime minister comes in, whoever that um, is going to have to get our own house, if you will, aligned, so that when he or she goes to sit with Donald, they have the pen that has the power to actually make whatever deal they're going to do.
Yes, but I mean, just playing back the tape on what you just said, what a brilliant negotiator Donald Trump
Yes.
is. It's terrifying, really. Like the first thing that he has done is picked at our scabs, for lack of a better word. Like he's picked at our weaknesses, and he's dividing us very skillfully. He knows exactly where the soft spots are.
Yes.
And it puts us in a very vulnerable negotiating position because we are not united right now.
And so, look, if I were sitting in Ottawa, I'd be saying, listen, I don't have the answers, but let's all sit down before we go talk to that guy, and before we go talk on Fox News and ABC and whoever you want to bipartisan go talk to. Why don't we get in our own house, figure out what we're going to do, and then we'll move with a united front.
Now,
Otherwise, we don't have a country.
I agree with you, and that would make perfect sense if you were negotiating like, you know, a company would do. But when you're negotiating as a country and you have premiers who themselves are responsible to their electorate and who themselves have elections coming up, um, some of them maybe sooner rather than later, they have their own political goals here, right? Like Premier Doug Ford has been hinting heavily at having to go to the polls early and have an election in Ontario a year before or 2 years before. Yeah, I think we're supposed to have one in 2026, and now what they're thinking about having one this year instead, because he feels like he needs to get a mandate from the people.
He's
He
already
doesn't
got a
have.
majority. Hello.
Yes, but
What else do you need?
what he's
No,
been saying lately is
I think that's just trying to create more instability. You see, when you create more instability, then people have panic, and then when you do that, you can become the savior. You see, that's what Trump's doing as well, scaring people about things, and then he says, "Look, but I'm the guy who's going to fix things."
yeah, nobody else can do it. I'm gonna get it done. You
So,
almost hear it, right?
oh yeah. So now, why don't you tell us? We're all here listening. We're in the investment world. We're trying to figure out, you know, the Canadian dollar was up over 1% yesterday. Today it's giving back. You know, we have all our auto parts guys, they're flip-flopping every day. Oil price moving all over the place. Oil companies, mining companies. What do we do? You're going to help us out with our investments here.
Well, look, I think the volatility speaks to this general lack of understanding of what exactly is going on, what's going to happen next. Some of that fear being hyped up that you spoke to, and that happens just as much in politics as it does in the market, right? So I think one of the things that's really smart, actually this morning, there was a piece in Bloomberg that I read about how JP Morgan Chase has just stood up a war room of their own. And that war room is a team of their analysts, and their job is to look at every single policy idea that comes out of the Trump administration and follow it through to like what does it mean if this thing that he tweeted actually becomes law? Like what markets is that going to impact? What sectors will be impacted positively and negatively? I think obviously not everyone's going to have the ability to stand up their own war room for that purpose, but if institutional investors can start thinking about and investing some of their own resources into bringing in people who are policy experts who can tell you how a law will go from a Trump tweet into law, like how things actually become law, and what some of the long-term implications of that, the unforeseen consequences of that law might be. I think that would be a really wise investment on the part of a lot of the investment bankers certainly in Canada. You want to keep an eye not just on what the Americans are doing, but on the Canadian government and how things are taking shape in Ottawa, and how people are responding, how the Canadians are responding to American not only tariffs but tax policy changes. Like some of the policies that Trump is introducing may appear on the surface to have no direct impact on Canada, like their own internal tax policies. But we know that when taxes are lowered in the United States, it has a direct impact on Canada's ability to compete in a variety of sectors.
Yep.
So we need to be monitoring all of that and thinking about how is this going to impact our businesses. It's a whole lot more work, unfortunately, for everyone. But it's really important to stay ahead of, because if you get left behind, you're exposing yourself to a lot of risk.
So there's a number of strategists, both noteworthy ones and ones that just have to manage their own account, that are leaning towards the view that just don't buy Canada. We just buy US. We'll just sell all our Canadian holdings and move that to US equities. What would you say to that?
That makes me sad. Look, I think that there are
trying to leave emotion out of it, because that's one of my 10 rules. No emotion in investing.
Definitely. Okay, so look, even if
here's
we're cold,
one of my favorite books, right?
The Daily Stoic
every day.
So even if we're cold about it, let's talk uranium then. Okay. So one of the things that we know is that Trump is pro-nuclear, and we know that the Americans desperately need a lot of energy. He's already talked about an energy emergency that he's declaring in the States.
He's going to bring back the entire strategic reserve, so that's like 400 million or something barrels.
Yeah. And the tech industry, who are like the tech bros are his new best friends, right? Like they're all in Washington. They are investing heavily in nuclear. We've seen Meta, Google, they're all like, they're going to build their own nuclear power plants for their data centers, because the data centers need that much energy, right? So if we know that the Americans are going to be investing heavily in a nuclear build out, a nuclear renaissance, frankly, they're going to need a lot of uranium. And there are really only two places in the world where you can get uranium, and that is Russia/Kazakhstan and Canada. We have a ton of it. They should be getting ours instead. The Biden administration banned Russian uranium. Whether or not that ban will survive the Trump administration, we'll see. But regardless, the uranium miners have been having a really hard time getting this stuff out of the ground all over the world, right? Even the Russian stuff. And staying on schedule. And the demand that we're seeing coming is going to far outstrip what they have, regardless of whether Russian uranium is at play. So we know that we've got to get it out of the ground in Canada. And so I think that's an area where Canada still has a lot of strength. We have critical minerals that you can only get in China that are here, that they've only found, I should say. I'm sure there are other resources, we just haven't found them in other parts of the world. Our biggest problem, though, is we can't get the stuff out of the ground fast enough. It takes 15 years to approve a mine in this country, and that's if you do it quickly. So we need to see regulatory overhauls to speed that process up. We need to see, real innovative deals with First Nations communities where they are equity owners in some of these projects to get that stuff moved out of there faster. I think there are a lot of, there's certainly still a lot of good things worth investing in Canada.
What about oil
American
and
refineries are
natural
only,
gas?
yeah, certainly we've got a lot of that, but American refineries are built for Canadian oil. So unless they're going, like, this is not there's no short-term solution for them to get off Canadian oil unless they buy like Venezuelan oil. Um, I'm not sure what other countries they could suddenly flip a switch and rely on. They need ours, but again, these are short-term fixes. I think we need to be investing strategically into the industry to help it modernize and help modernize our own refining capacity.
You mentioned some of the minerals, critical minerals, like any in particular?
Certainly, anything that we need for the tech industry or for battery metals. So whether that's nickel, whether that's like, rare earth metals, we have those as well. Anything for stainless steel production that the military in the US in particular will need. And then, the defense industry in particular is another area to really look at in Canada, that the Canadian government, no matter who it is, whether it's the Liberals or the Conservatives for the next couple of years, everybody knows we have to make a massive and historical investment into defense in this country, because the Americans are not going to tolerate it if we don't meet our NATO 2% targets. So a hell of a lot of money is about to be spent in defense and the defense-related industries in Canada, whether that is getting minerals out of the ground in order to make the products that we need, or investing in strategic infrastructure into the Arctic. Like, why haven't we laid any subsea cables in the Canadian Arctic? There are over 3,000 kilometers around Alaska alone that have been laid in the past 2 years. They've got another 3,000 kilometers coming in the next 2 years, 0 kilometers in the Canadian Arctic. That's ludicrous. Like, we should be building that capability out. We should be building, more roads. We should be building more everything. All of that construction requires concrete. It requires aggregate. Like there's so much that only we have, and we haven't even talked about water, right? Because water is another thing, natural resource. I think it's a bit controversial, probably more controversial than oil, but we haven't really scratched the surface there yet on discussions around water. But that's something else that we have. Like, you look at what just happened in LA, which is arguably a city that maybe should never have existed, where it is located. But like, there are entire cities in the United States that desperately need more water.
Which we have an abundance of.
Yes.
Plus hydroelectricity. There, one last area I want to touch on, and that's renewables, because Trump did an executive order to shut that down. What does that mean exactly?
Oh, so look, there's this really great show called Landmen. I think it's an HBO show, maybe. But
what's it called?
Landmen. Billy Bob Thornton stars in it, and he plays look, they work on oil rigs, and he's a senior manager at an oil company. It's an incredible show, but he has this great monologue where he's talking about how if some of this stuff was economical, like if it actually made sense, then the oil companies would have been investing in it years ago. And some of them do have investments in renewable, certainly, in renewable businesses that make sense, of course. But at the end of the day, the reality is we need oil for not even just for fueling everything in North America, but we need oil for everything that's made of plastic, like that's made of polyester. Like, it's in every element of our life, and it is a fool's game to think that we could get away from it.
Wow, that was deep. I'm glad you said it and not me, but yeah, totally. There's a very interesting commercial that Cenovus just put out, and Cenovus is one of our top ideas on the oil side. and it actually shows a family, with a child coming home, and the mom and dad are around the kitchen table and such. And then it shows, this our world needs energy and needs oil. And then you flash, if it doesn't have oil, and you see all the things in the house that are no longer there, what they were cooking doesn't happen. And so many things change, and they're looking at each other going, what happened?
Yeah.
And
And you could say the same thing for potash, right? Like if we would, Canada is also strong on potash, and if we weren't exporting that to the United States,
another one of our big ideas. Yeah, I like nutrient
yeah,
here. Um,
exactly. Like if we didn't have that, what would the agricultural industry be like in North America?
Melanie, I'm just, obviously, no one knows. Trump says 25%. He says February 1st. If you were a gambling uh, person, man, woman, what would you say to that?
I would say that Donald Trump has this tendency to say the most outrageous thing that he can think of and then do the second most outrageous. And and by the time you get to the second most outrageous thing, you all feel like, "Oh, well, it's not that bad then." So he may be coming out of the gate saying 25% tariffs across the board, and then he'll actually just introduce 10%, which would still be catastrophic, by the way. Um, but then people will be like, "Well, I guess, it's not that bad." Like
It's
that,
called,
I guess
it's
it's being
actually a very,
reasonable.
it's, if you read his book, The Art of the Deal, and it's a negotiation tactic called anchoring. And that's exactly how you do it. It works phenomenally well, no matter what you're in. That I offer you something for for 100, and you say, I'm only going to give you 20. That's all I got. And now everything comes off 20. So if I get 30, me, you're winning because you're not paying 100, and I don't feel so bad because I'm not getting only 20.
Yeah.
And so I think he's playing a little bit of that, and we'll see how this sort of plays out. All right. In the interest of time, let's try to wrap up, and let's go to your favorite book,
Oh.
and why.
Um,
There it
right
is.
now, my favorite book is Ed Conway's Material World. Six raw metal materials that shape modern civilization. It's brilliant. It's a long one. You could probably listen to it, I'm sure, but it goes through the importance of like salt, oil and gas. I think lithium is in there, but it goes through all sorts of minerals. Sand. Sand is one of my favorites because
Mm.
sand you need.
We do a lot of that up in Muskoka. Uh, the Hutchison brothers, there's a big business. All the sand that's in the Olympic volleyball, beach volleyball, comes from there.
Yes, but you can't make microchips without sand.
Oh,
So that's ultimately where like it's an incredible because you're making it with like it's glass, right? And so anything that so it explains where the best sand in the world comes from for microchips, and it helps you to understand like the supply chain is incredibly elaborate and requires really the whole world in order to build these chips. It's fascinating. So I highly recommend this book for anyone who's looking to do like a bit of a deeper dive into not just the importance of mining to our life, but also understanding like current technologies that keep us all afloat and how easily our supply chains could be completely destroyed if one particular factory was taken offline or one particular resource ran out.
mm.
It's both terrifying and illuminating as a read.
So much of our world is just in time.
Yes, exactly.
We get frustrated when our computer takes more than a split second to respond to a tap. Um, okay, and your favorite breakfast item?
So my husband is allergic to eggs, and so we never have eggs at home. So when I get out to the city and get to have breakfast out at a restaurant, I love to have some poached eggs.
Poached eggs. No bacon, sausage, hash browns.
Rain at the Royal York in
Oh,
downtown Toronto has an amazing like avocado toast with poached eggs on it. is decadent. Definitely not an everyday kind of breakfast food, but if you want to treat yourself every once in a while, it's a good one.
And I'm not so sure that it's a value conscious meal.
No, no, not at all, but
Uh,
delicious.
Mikhail, I don't know if you're on the call here, but I recall a breakfast Mikhail and I had at Rain, and couldn't get our head around how much things costed.
Oh, you could buy like the farm for what they're selling the dish for, but
Anyway, listen, really thank you for your time. We may check in with you, I think, over the next few weeks and get some input, and we'll see how this goes. I'll call you this afternoon. Take care.
okay.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. Stay tuned.